Okay, good morning. I'm Maurice Carter. I'm the president of Sustainable Newton. I want to welcome all of you to our 2021 kickoff, diving into Drawdown Georgia with John Lanier. I'm not John, so obviously this is John. Uh, I've been extremely excited about this event. In fact, I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and couldn't go back to sleep. So we're really excited. This is a big year for Sustainable Newton and Drawdown Georgia. The work that John and the Ray C. Anderson Foundation is very exciting to us and very important. And so we're really honored to have him with us this morning. These are not normal times. We know it wouldn't have been a virtual kickoff last year, but we're still moving forward. I felt like it was important to at least dress up a little bit this morning, which doesn't happen very often. So I was in the bedroom putting my shoes on and bent down to use the shoehorn to get the shoes on since they hadn't been on in a while, and I got a terrible cramp in my calf. So I don't know if that says something about the how the pandemic has affected my fitness or my practice at getting dressed, but we persevered in that. I persevered, and we're going to persevere in this organization and do great things this year. Some of you heard us start to talk about Drawdown Georgia in Sustainable Newton last year, and especially in October as we shared exciting news about the launch of that program, the 20 high impact solutions that they have identified for crowd solving climate change in Georgia, specific to Georgia, our unique set of environmental, cultural, and economic circumstances. So we also in December had a virtual civic dinner focused on the food and agriculture solutions from Drawdown Georgia. Many of you joined us for that and probably came back today, curious to learn more. But for others, this may be the first time you've even heard the word drawdown, and I'm going to get John to help this morning to explain a little bit more about what that is and the background of how this program came to be. But for us in Sustainable Newton, we believe this is the single most important initiative for climate in the Southeast. It's a top priority for us organizationally to do what we can to bring these solutions into our county, into our community. The Ray C. Anderson Foundation, which John is executive director, has been a driving force behind Drawdown Georgia. And John's probably the single best person I can think of to help explain to us what they mean when they say bringing climate solutions home. John's been the executive director with the foundation since 2013, working with his family to advance the legacy of his grandfather, Ray. And I'll let him tell us about the man his grandfather was and how that legacy sparked not only John's path into environmentalism, but really business as a whole, how it changed industry as we know it. John was an attorney before joining the foundation and was a past chair of the board of directors of the nonprofit Southface. He's also an author. He authored a book, Mid-Course Correction Revisited, which was a renewal back in 2019 of his grandfather's original work about his own mid-course correction. John writes a blog called Ecocentricity, which you can find on the Anderson Foundation site. And he's an Atlanta native who enjoys life with his wife, Chantel, and their children, JR and Cecilia. So I'm going to let John introduce himself and the background of the program. I'm going to ask a few questions, but we're going to leave time because I'd really like to allow all of you on here to also ask your questions. So when we get to that, you'll be able to raise your hand in Zoom and I will unmute you and you can turn your camera on if you like. If you don't want to do that, you can certainly type questions in the chat and I'll read them, but I hope that many of you will choose to go ahead and join us and make this very participatory. So with that, John, again, thanks for being here and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maurice. And I have to say on the front end, my gratitude to you all for your work and your concern about these issues, but even more so, you are one of the first groups who was not already a part of Drawdown Georgia, not already helping to create the research like Georgia Tech, the University of Georgia, Emory, and Georgia State, but the first audience that we really reached out to that got it immediately and understood the real potential of what we collectively are building. So you honor us just by coming here today and saying that what we've tried to create is of value. So my gratitude. So I'm going to give you a bit of a narrative story here. I want to tell you about my grandfather and how he is the inspiration for Drawdown Georgia, for this movement. I want to tell you how it came to be where we are right now in this moment, this year, but really here at this critical time at the beginning of the year. And then the forward-looking vision for Drawdown Georgia, especially as we think out one decade and what needs to happen on climate solutions everywhere, but for us here in Georgia, to build the momentum to eventually achieve drawdown, that word that I will define in due course for you all. So first, I want to give you that story of my grandfather. He was a Georgia boy born in 1934, earned a scholarship to Georgia Tech, playing football, actually. And it was at Georgia Tech where he excelled primarily academically and graduated with an industrial engineering degree in 1954. And he was off on his career as an industrialist. He was in the textile space, working for a number of companies, climbing the various ladders that he could within that space, bouncing around the Southeast somewhat. But he had an entrepreneur's heart. And about my age, I'm 35 now, about that age, my grandfather started really looking for what might be his business. What might he start so that he could be the captain of his own future? And he saw carpet tile on a business trip in Europe. At the time, in the mid-70s, carpet tile was not something you saw in the United States, but Ray felt like there was an opportunity to pioneer these squares of carpet that people see so often today. If you walk through the Atlanta airport, which maybe we haven't done in a while, but I promise you, next time you do, you'll see carpet tiles underfoot. He started the American carpet tile industry by founding his company, Interface. Interface grew to be the world's largest manufacturer of carpet tile. And so in 1994, when my grandfather was 60 years old, he had built the company to be global and doing about $600 million a year in revenue. That was an important year for him. He was starting to think maybe retirement, but it was that year that customers in California first started asking Interface what it was doing for the environment. And these questions made it all the way up the chain to the CEO's desk. And here is Ray thinking, well, we comply with all environmental law. Isn't that enough? He was your typical industrialist at the time, where the environmental mission was to not run afoul of the law. But these group of customers representing millions of dollars of revenue in California, they wanted more than that. So the company pulled together a task force, and the task force was charged with creating Interface's environmental vision so that the sales team could be equipped to respond to such questions. And they asked Ray, come kick us off, give us your environmental vision. And he didn't have one. So he was desperate for inspiration. And he picked up a book that an employee had just happened to leave on his desk called The Ecology of Commerce, written by Paul Hawken. Remember that name. We'll come back to it. The thesis of this book was that business and industry, companies just like Interface, were responsible for the vast majority of environmental degradation that the world was seeing. But they were also the only sector, business in general, that was capable of fundamentally solving the problem. Business must lead on the environment. My grandfather read that book straight through in one night and was moved to literal tears by it because, in his words, he was convicted as a plunderer of the earth. He referred to it for the rest of his life as his spear in the chest moment, where he had this true moral epiphany and saw the dark side of his business and others just like it. And so he had his inspiration, and he plagiarized shamelessly from Paul Hawken's work. He charged his company with becoming sustainable. And what they meant by that was the very high bar of we have to figure out how to do no harm to the planet or to communities through our operations. In the years that followed from 1994, the remaining 17 years of my grandfather's life were dedicated towards proving that sustainability, when done right, is good for the bottom line. Not because that's the intent. The intent was to pursue sustainability. But what Interface and my grandfather became known for is what he called the business case for sustainability. So they are known around the world as one of the foremost environmental companies because they have this authentic commitment to doing better, doing right. And it came from my grandfather's legacy. When my grandfather passed away in 2011, he left his estate to this family foundation. And Ray was always aware of the threat from climate change. I asked him back in 2004 if he could wave a magic wand and make one environmental challenge go away. Which one would it be? He didn't miss a beat, and he said it's global warming. He always understood that. That was echoing in our ears somewhat with our newfound opportunity to be grant makers, to give his estate away to others. And so about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, conversations with Paul Hawken, the same person who had written the book that changed my grandfather's life, they had become good, close friends. Paul shared with us for the first idea, this idea of Project Drawdown, what became this organization. He wanted to know what climate solutions that humanity already has. We're not talking about the things yet to be invented like fusion power. What do we have right now that can solve the problem of global warming? And if we scale them, which ones do the most good? Can we get an apples to apples comparison of LED lights and regenerative agriculture and electric vehicles and educating girls in the developing world? That was the vision that Project Drawdown laid out, to study the solutionscape for the planet. And they coined the term drawdown, which means the point in time in the future where the atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases start to go down. So I'll demystify that slightly. The moment that we see less carbon in the atmosphere than the previous year, it's like a bathtub. The moment that it stops going down in the amount of water in the bathtub instead of up, that's drawdown. That is the ultimate goal, because what happens when we achieve drawdown, when we reduce greenhouse gases accumulated in the atmosphere, the planet will begin to cool. And it's a much more accessible goal than the very scientifically valid 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures that you hear about is related to the Paris Climate Accord and multiple governments' commitments to climate. I don't really have a sense of what pre-industrial temperatures even were to tell you what 2 degrees above it is. It's a tough goal for the average person to relate to, but drawdown is one that makes sense. So they released a New York Times best-selling book in 2017 called Drawdown that showed the 100 most substantive solutions to reverse global warming. It was tremendous. It changed the dialogue globally. They really have had an impact all across the globe, with the book having been translated into multiple languages. They changed the climate conversation, and they did it in a few ways. First, they led with data, which, again, climate scientists live in this world, but the average person didn't have a sense of what the numbers really showed. So they wanted to make accessible to people everywhere the real potential of climate solutions in numbers that they can understand. Second is they had a fundamentally positive message. For a long time, and for good reason, the climate movement has been telling us how scary this problem is. I understand the science. I understand how scary it is. But if we just beat the drum on how scary that future is, we can risk turning people off. This is true of environmentalism in general. We have to give positive visions, not just negative ones, to try to inspire people with. And they did that. They said this is achievable. And by scaling these solutions, we get to solve a whole bunch of other problems related to equity, related to the natural environment, related to human health. we can do this and we should do this for multiple reasons. And the third thing that they did that changed the narrative in climate was to make it accessible. Because for a long time, all anybody ever heard about climate solutions were solar, 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 maybe some wind, and if you can, eat less red meat. It's like that doesn't really give people a sense of the opportunity to engage in reversing global warming, in doing that work. With 100 different solutions, no matter your background, no matter your interest, you can find something that resonates with you, that you can work on personally or professionally. That was a tremendous inspiration to our family's foundation, which is here in Georgia. This is our home. This is our network. This is where our assets, where Ray Anderson's estate can do real good. But the one thing that Project Drawdown couldn't do for us was to tell us what solutions worked in Georgia. If you pick up the book and flip through it, the one that came out in 2017, you look at the top 10 list, number 2 is onshore wind. For a variety of reasons, that doesn't work in Georgia. Number 5 on the list is tropical forest preservation and restoration. Definitely doesn't work in Georgia. So what does the solutionscape look like for our state? Exact same methodology that they used, but if we just had a Georgia lens. That was the question that we set out to answer. And it's the bones of Drawdown Georgia is, can we do the research to study the carbon reduction potential of solutions in Georgia? And our foundation made the grant to these multiple universities to go and answer that question, which they have done. And it is tremendous research, highlighting 20 different solutions across 5 different solution sectors. They are electricity, a common one that people would expect. That's where most of the potential is, but not all of it. We see in transportation just as much potential. The single largest source of carbon within Georgia's net carbon footprint is gasoline being burned by vehicles. The third solution sector, buildings and materials. The fourth is land sinks. And the fifth is food and agriculture. So across those 5, 20 different solutions that are high impact. A common question related to this is, how do you decide what high impact is? That was a question that the research team had to really grapple with. And they made an arbitrary but important and justified decision. They basically looked at, well, what is Georgia's carbon footprint? How much more carbon are we putting on net into the atmosphere each year? The answer is about 125 million metric tons of greenhouse gases, which is, stated another way, 125 megatons. That's how much extra water we're putting into the bathtub that gets taken out, then gets taken out by the drain, if you will. So if it's 125, well, a 1 megaton reduction, 1 out of that 125 over the next decade, that's meaningful points on the board. We got to do 125 times to achieve drawdown for our state to become carbon neutral. But if a solution can get at least 1, we think that's an appropriate threshold. So 20 different solutions have the potential to scale to that amount. This research, though, is just a foundation for what Drawdown Georgia is intended to be, because there's a risk here. It's a risk I've been mindful of all along. If Drawdown Georgia becomes synonymous just with the research, just with a flashy website or a report that you could have on a bookshelf, and nobody does anything with it, then we haven't accomplished anything. We talked internally with the research team about an analogy for this, and we borrowed it from my grandfather. He talked about Interface, his company, climbing Mount Sustainability. And at the peak of this mountain, they could say that they did no harm to the environment. Well, why not say we're trying to climb a mountain here in Georgia? Achieving drawdown is its own mountain. We have identified 20 different solution faces to scale. We have mapped that mountain, but now we need people to pick that map up and start the climb. And that's where engagement with organizations, with individuals like the people within Sustainable Newton become so critically important. This has to become a movement of sorts. Drawdown Georgia is not an organization. We didn't create a new 501c3 because we wanted to create the space for people and organizations to freely join. It is a movement in the purest form of it, where people and their organizations see opportunity to pick up what research has been done and help scale the solutions in whatever ways they see fit. We invite and encourage that. So we're at that critical point where we have to pivot from just doing the research on climate solutions to working to scale them. And if we do it right over this next decade, we can reduce Georgia's carbon footprint by about 1/3. That's not achieving the ultimate goal. That's not drawdown. But that's what the data shows is possible if we work really hard. A 1/3 reduction this decade sets us up in the next decade to hopefully achieve drawdown. We have to build the momentum of climate solutions here in Georgia. The last thing that I'll say about it, and then I know we're going to have lots of questions to go deeper, is that there's a critical component that's at the heart of what all of this is. We aren't just talking about carbon. Again, this was inspired by Project Drawdown, but we've brought this next point that I'm going to make, really brought it home within the work of the research and what comes next. These 20 solutions matter in so many other ways. Yes, financial. Many of them actually offer net savings in the next decade if we can scale them. There's financial reasons to do this beyond just the climate reasons to do it. But what motivates me and what I think motivates others even more than that is the opportunity to go beyond carbon. And so the research team has looked at every solution and mapped them onto 4 different considerations. The 4 are the equity impacts of these solutions. What's the point in scaling climate solutions if we don't do it equitably? We need to find ways to simultaneously reverse global warming and advance environmental justice work. Economic development, inclusive economic development. When you talk about scaling solutions, the number of jobs that can be created, it's tremendous. There's so much opportunity there. The human health impact, when you talk about things like a plant-rich diet and reducing food waste, it's easy to see the connections that it makes. But also when you talk about scaling renewable energy sources, the air pollution that would be prevented from that matters to so many communities, especially those disadvantaged communities that live right next to the power plants that are making the asthma problem in our state that much worse. And then we have the natural environment as well. We can create a more vibrant and healthy natural Georgia by scaling these solutions. To me, that shows that there are so many doors into this movement that we are trying to create. And I only need people to pick one of them that matters to them and set foot through that door into this movement. We have made it as inclusive as we possibly can because that's what the data shows. All of this, many problems can be solved by us working together on it. So I'll leave it there. And Maurice, you tell me what more we should talk about in all of this. And I can say plenty more and have a conversation.
Well, great. And I want to go ahead and ask people to be, start thinking about questions you want to ask. And in just a couple of minutes, we'll start to hopefully pull you in, and I'd encourage you, if you would, please, let's get you on the screen and let you ask your question direct. But before we go there, you kind of touched on it, John, but I mean, in these 20 solutions, there are some things that as an individual, it's really hard to get our hands wrapped around. I can't, in electricity, I can't do cogeneration, and not all of us can install rooftop solar, but we can all make changes in our daily lives to move the electricity we use off of peak time, as an example. And when it comes to food and agriculture, we had our dinner last December, but we do have a few farmers on here today, but most of us don't farm, but we can support those who do. We can reduce our food waste, we can compost, we can shift to more plant-forward diet. So what else can people do to personally get involved to help move that that movement that you're talking about?
So I'm going to say a couple of things here. One is to, in a sense, reinforce your observation, and then to really answer the question. So first, to reinforce the observation, there's a key component to what the research showed and what we then demonstrate on the website, a novel approach to counting carbon in meaningful ways, if you will. I talked about that 1 megaton by 2030 threshold for a high impact solution. So the researchers wanted people to understand what a megaton is within the context of each solution. So I'll give you a for instance here, but this has been calculated for all 20 solutions, and you can find it on our website. So 1 megaton of reduction for landfill methane, where you take a landfill, you cap it so that you can capture the methane off of it. You then burn that methane for energy instead of allowing the methane, a greenhouse gas, to go up into the atmosphere. So if we were to have 4 new landfill methane facilities with a 5 megawatt gas to energy system by 2030, that is a 1 megaton reduction. So just 4, right?
Yeah.
Well, I can't help make landfill methane happen. I don't know even the people to talk to about that, but those folks are out there. So it shows that there's scales of action. Sometimes for solutions to move forward, we need the experts or large organizations who work in that space to move the ball forward. But on the other end of the spectrum, you gave some good examples. I'm going to go with electric vehicles. Not everybody is in a position where they can go and make the transition to an electric vehicle. I recognize that, but many people are. It might be a legitimate choice for you when you consider your next car. If we were to have 250,000 internal combustion engines replaced with electric vehicles, that would be a 1 megaton reduction. So now we've normalized it. 4 landfill methane plants, 250,000 electric vehicles. That's the same amount of carbon. And it gives you a sense, again, of some solutions are up to individuals making choices, like on the electric vehicles. Sometimes organizations buying fleets of electric vehicles matters too, but it's relatable. And other ones just aren't. And that's okay. Because now, to answer your question, what can people do? I honestly believe that we should look absolutely for the ways that we can reduce our own carbon footprint. Look for the solutions that you can scale individually. Inspire your neighbors to do the same. But more than that, use the words Drawdown Georgia. Talk about it as this growing movement. Talk about it as this place where people can collaborate on climate solutions, regardless of your interest and your background. If we can successfully get this out there into people's collective consciousness across Georgia as a good thing, if people see it as a good thing for all of the reasons that it is, we can depoliticize climate action and do it in the context of Georgia. So just talking about it now at this critical starting point can help us spread the good news, if you will, of what this is intended to be.
Speaking of politics, Bob Pop has a good question in the chat, and that is, what role does the Georgia legislature play in reducing our carbon footprint? And does the Dorado, Georgia movement have legislative leaders it is working with?
So this is a great question. There are absolutely some solutions that are only going to scale with action by governments and state government, but also at local levels as well. There's a role there too. To the state level piece of it, we know how important that is. There's also solutions that they could scale without government, but will go much faster with a collaborative approach, recognizing the role of policy. We don't want Drawdown Georgia to become political, but we want it to inform politics, to inform policy. And so with this team of researchers already established in the work that they've done, our hope is that it can be seen as a resource for elected officials to draw upon. One key example to bring this to a level that is a little bit more concrete that I want to speak to is a bill that it was introduced last year in the Georgia House, I believe. It didn't progress, but there's hope that it can this year. The bill is all about carbon markets and opening them up. So a carbon market is where if an organization wants to go and buy a carbon credit to be able to say they've reduced their net carbon footprint by offsetting it somewhere else, well, they can go and purchase those credits, and they're validated in a variety of ways to make sure that the markets are as honest as they can be, things like that. Well, a lot of carbon markets are things like reforestation efforts. Maybe trees get planted somewhere because the money to plant those trees came from, take Delta Airlines, for instance. They have a carbon credit purchasing program. But that's not the only place where you can get carbon and have a source of funds help enhance the carbon reduction. So the state of Georgia is considering a bill that would allow developers of buildings who build those buildings with climate negative, carbon negative materials to sell the credit. So the examples of this are some concrete can be infused with carbon dioxide. Mass timber, if you build buildings with a new type of wood product, they are just as structurally sound up to 10 stories, just as fire resistant, and they are carbon negative. They can be. And there's other products as well. So if a building gets built and it's carbon negative on construction, the amount of carbon that is negative that was saved on that can be sold, if this bill passes, into a carbon market. So I could go and try to reduce my carbon footprint and buy the offsets. This incentivizes developers to go and build with wood, to build with carbon infused concrete, things like that. And it begins to shift the economics in it. This can only happen if the bill moves forward. So yes, absolutely, there is a critical role for elected leaders. But we don't want that to be the only lever that gets pulled, because then you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And Drawdown Georgia can scale. This movement can build before there's a critical mass of elected leaders in our state who are ready to be behind it. And if we can build it, then we'll show them the opportunity to then join this, to rely upon the research and to tap into the movement that we've created.
Right. And we'll get information about that legislation and keep our members updated, because we can all play a part in helping move that forward. I've got a good question here from Amin, who says about the educational aspect of the Drawdown Project. How do we incorporate some of the findings in our course in educational settings? I'm an assistant professor at Kennesaw State University, wondering if there's interest to educate the next generation of engineering students about these efforts.
Absolutely. I know that as part of the research that was done, a number of classes at Georgia Tech, at Emory, and at UGA and Georgia State have been now geared somewhat towards Drawdown Georgia. Some student help was leveraged in doing the initial research, and there was just a great opportunity to educate college level folks about this work. So there might even be syllabi out there. I can't speak to the specifics of it, but from some of the research team at these universities that could be then replicated. There's also opportunity to create your own. I encourage anybody that just wants to take the data on our website, and there's more detailed into the weeds of the research team itself data that's available on Georgia Tech's website. So not everything lives on the drawdowngA.org site. If you were to Google Drawdown Georgia, Georgia Tech, you'll find the link with their site. So that can be mined for a lot of the detail that might be a bit more suitable towards creating a class of some sort. Our entire approach here is to encourage others to lead in the places where they see fit. Because another potential pitfall for this is if the Ray C. Anderson Foundation that I lead, if it becomes viewed as the leader of Drawdown Georgia, if we become the gatekeeper, then things won't happen as fast as they need to. We want to be a leader, not the leader of Drawdown Georgia. And that creates opportunity then for leadership in other spaces. So if somebody sees an opportunity to create a class that maybe would even be replicated by other universities, take it and run with it. You have permission. You have encouragement to find your own ways to lead in this space. You don't need to run it by me first or anybody else in the team. But if we can be helpful, we want to be.
Right. I've got a question here from Mike McQuaid, who's a fellow board member of mine at Sustainable Newton. And Mike is asking if you see evidence Georgians are coming to a greater understanding of the importance of sustainability issues in their day-to-day lives. And I will add to that, since you and I chatted about this earlier, if you could maybe, as part of answering this, talk about the survey that was done as part of Drawdown Georgia last year.
Sure. There's two pieces of really encouraging research into this, one that we commissioned. But first, I have to start by lifting up the Yale Climate Communications Project. I don't have the name exactly right, but for a long time out of Yale, there's been research into the feelings that people have about climate. And they even go down to, I think, the county level in all of this. So they provided some understanding of the sort of background for Georgia, but we also wanted to have a little bit more tailored approach. So as part of this, we partnered with a polling group called Stable Kernel, and they went and polled Georgians, got to a significant enough sample size across the state to be able to take a temperature of average Georgians about how much do they talk about climate change and how concerned are they about it? What climate solutions do they recognize? You know, their research showed, yeah, people know what an electric vehicle is, but not many people know what demand response is. Things like that. So the research that was showed, which is, I don't know exactly where on the website, but we want people to see it. So I know it's there somewhere. It has been very encouraging. More people than you might think, more than 50% within Georgia, think that climate change is real and that we should be doing something about it. So it's not universal, but the debate is not as widespread about the legitimacy of climate science as people might think that it is. Moreover, people expressed a preference to support companies that are taking climate change seriously. So that vote with your dollar piece is something that resonates with a majority of Georgians. When they broke down the data as well and looked at it demographically, especially split across age, young people absolutely care about climate. That's true globally. We see it in the movements that have popped up led by students. It's also true here in Georgia. So there is not only more fertile soil for the message to be received now than most people think, it's only going to accelerate, especially as young people who are learning about climate a lot more in academic settings and just on their own from their peers. As they move through their educations and into their careers, we're going to find that the next generation that's right around the corner takes this very seriously. And I'm so encouraged by that.
Great. I have a question, another board member, Nancy Schultz, who is asking, does Drawdown Georgia have relationships or connections with major waste removal providers such as Waste Management Incorporated, and any, that decisions about landfills are controlled by the EPD, but largely influenced by these companies?
No direct connections that I'm aware of. It's possible that the professor who is the research lead on the recycling solution has some of the connections there, or at least was able to get data from some of these companies to help inform upon it. But these are examples of relationships that need to be built. These are companies that need to know what this is, what the data shows, that Georgians care about it. And to my point earlier, I'm probably not the right person to make that call to Waste Management or whomever, because we don't want to be the gatekeepers. But there's another piece of it too, is that we recognize I'm not the right person to speak to a lot of different audiences. This is very true when you talk about some of the equity considerations and when you speak about communities of color and disadvantaged communities that have been so marginalized in many ways, but in particular in the environmental space, in the climate space, their concerns often aren't heard. Well, if I'm the guy to go to try to talk to them about it, no, I'm not a credible person. But Organizations like the Partnership for Southern Equity that works in this equity space and understands the importance of climate, they are the right ones. I can't go talk to tree farmers in Georgia. They're not going to listen to me. I'm a city boy who doesn't know anything about planting trees to begin with. But the Georgia Forestry Association and their leadership, recognizing the good of Drawdown Georgia, they can be the spokespeople for that. So a critical part of this is, as there are new audiences like the waste management folks that need to be engaged, we collectively need to find the right spokesperson to those audiences and encourage them to take the message of Drawdown Georgia to those new audiences. So that, again, is an open invitation to find opportunities to lead if in your work or if somebody you know could be that right spokesperson.
Yeah, I think that's a good point just to share, for us to share from our organization with the folks on here today, that part of what we're looking at, we had a planning session for Sustainable Newton Monday night. And, you know, our big thing is, how do we take these 20 solutions and move them forward in our community? And we're looking at audiences and saying, what do individuals need to know about? What do small businesses? What do our corporate citizens? And then what do our government leaders? And we're trying to facilitate conversations across each of those audiences, across these solutions where it makes sense. And so part of what we'll be doing is saying, where do we have expertise within our organization to facilitate that? And where do we need to go find people? But this is a good example, I think, where you know, we can move that conversation forward ourselves. And certainly, John, if we think we need resources, I'll ask the technical team that you guys have for advice. But I think it is on us to facilitate that conversation and to pull those audiences in. We need we have a number of people on today from our local governments, some from our business community, and, you know, a corporation is going to have a different view on this than our small business owners. But we're really excited that you've given us a framework, but that we can now take that dialogue forward. So the people here that joined today, you know, we want to hear from you. What do you think you've got to bring to the table for that conversation, or what questions do you want to see us help answer? So, you know, a great opportunity, I think.
Yeah, I think what this, you know, where we see our role as the foundation in this is to help build that movement. In many respects, we're focused in 2021 at the Ray C. Anderson Foundation on doing two things. One is communicating. I mean, we've already put a lot of work into that with the branding work done on the website, making sure that this really technical climate science gets translated into a format that people can, of all different stripes in Georgia, can connect with. So a part of communicating this year is going to be lifting up the real world examples of what's happening. So when there are cool stories that folks like you all can help tell of what you're doing or what you have done that help move the ball forward on Drawdown Georgia, we want to lift those stories up. Relatedly, part of our communications efforts is we've provided to the Drawdown Georgia community a tool called Groupit, Groopit. It's a software, a social media platform in many respects that has been customized for Drawdown Georgia to allow individuals to come in and be a part of this growing movement. There's two components to what it's intended to be. One is to provide that network where people can find out what's happening on climate solutions within Georgia, can find other people, maybe within their geographic region, who are active in this space, or perhaps they find people in the solution type that they're interested in. You know, who are the electric vehicle owners statewide? They could find each other in this place. It's early days of this, and we encourage, at this point, we need to build that critical mass of people who log in and are active in this Groupit community. The second component of what Groupit's intended to be is citizen science. It's not going to be the best data, but it gives a concrete example of what people can do. We, as part of Groupit, encourage folks to log in and share the project, share the things that are happening. It can be as simple as, hey, I just got my neighbor to sign up for a composting service. Well, log that in, because that's one data point that shows that composting as one of our solutions is scaling. And what if we could really get a sense of where all of the climate solutions are scaling statewide? So that's a component of it where we hope by providing that others take it and run with it. The second thing that we're focused on this year is in this sort of convening role around different conversations that need to happen. So as we find that there are gatherings that take place, can we be a part of future gatherings, or can we just, again, show what's happening, point to it on the website of who is coming together, when and why, and for what purpose to move the ball forward on Drawdown Georgia? We can help lift that sort of thing up. So in many respects, I think my answer to the question is, I hope that in all of your successes this year, that you find we're able to help amplify them. And that's going to be an important role between our networks that we're building together.
Right. And on the group it and the things John just mentioned, at the end of this session, through the magic of Zoom, the last screen that will pop up for you is a link to the Drawdown Georgia site. And then also you'll receive an automated email from us in the next day that thanks you for being here, and also includes links to the Drawdown Georgia information and Sustainable Newton as well. So I think it's real important, and while this is fresh on everybody's mind today, to engage in some way. It may not be that you've got something to put in today or tomorrow, but in a week when you do, we want everybody to know what's there and how you get involved. Had a question here in the chat from JJ Hayden. JJ asks, how is environmental sustainability related to economic sustainability?
Depends on what scope of economic sustainability we're talking about. So this is actually a part of the book that I wrote, and thank you for mentioning that in the introduction. When my grandfather wrote Mid-Course Correction, it was in 1997, came out in 98. It was just a few years into his environmental epiphany. So most of what that book was a forward-looking vision that my grandfather had for what interface would become. And in many respects, it has become that. He called it the prototypical company of the 21st century. And there is literally, I'm going to get the book and show you a diagram, just hold it up. There is a chart that shows what that connection between economics at the scale of one business and the environment looks like. This graphic is absolutely something worth spending time with. The prototypical company of the 21st century. So Mid-Course Correction Revisited, you will find this, and it shows all of the linkages between how a company operates and the earth, the community, recognizing across the linear supply chain all the way down to customers. These connections are robust and are worth exploring in the scope of a book. The main thing at the scale of one company about this intersection point is that we have an economic system that is linear. The way the industrial world works and other businesses that support how we produce and consume things go from the extraction of Earth's materials through use to landfilling things. That harm that happens on both ends, both the disposal of things and the extraction of things within our economy, is the primary way that there is linkage between our economics and the environment. Economic sustainability for that individual company can be enhanced by environmental sustainability being authentically pursued. That is chapter 9 of Mid-Course Correction, exploring it. In brief, the 4 reasons why Interface became a more profitable company because they pursued sustainability. The 4 reasons are: you become more efficient. A lot of the things that businesses can do to be better reduce their costs. They make better things and they do so with less material and they waste less. The amount of water savings, for instance, that Interface has achieved has been huge, and that's water they don't have to pay for. And that's one of many examples. The second reason is that sustainability became a wellspring of innovation. There's so many new amazing things that Interface was able to create and sell in the marketplace because they started asking the question, how can we do right by the earth? The third piece is that it made the employee culture so much more robust. Sustainability was a higher purpose for the company, and you better believe they attracted better talent, retained the people they had, and had a better culture because of this commitment. And that translates to cost savings and profit gains. And then finally, there is goodwill in the marketplace for companies that do things the right way. And you're going to have more loyal customers and folks willing to pay a slight premium if necessary to buy something from the right company. That's the linkage for an individual company. But to answer the question more fully, I won't go too much longer here, but we also have to think through the impacts between environment and not just one company, but an entire economic system that we have. And in this book, I explore in chapter 10 the question of, well, if we need prototypical companies of the 21st century, companies like Interface, I think we also probably need a prototypical economy of the 21st century. What would that look like? How can our current economic system, broadly called neoliberal economics or Western economics or capitalism, whatever word you want to put to it, how can it get even better? It's the best that we've seen, that the world's ever seen. More improvement to quality of life, but unfortunately at the expense of the environment and many disadvantaged communities. Can it evolve to the next great thing? Yes, it can. It get better. It can be improved upon. So we have to be mindful of the ways in which not just individual companies matter, but the entire economic system matters when it comes to impact on the environment.
Great. Theodosia Wade has asked two questions. I'll give you the first one here. Georgia Climate Project Conference, will you be presenting this year?
So the Georgia Climate Project that is housed at Emory and multiple universities, they had a conference in November of 2019. That conference was tremendous. It was amazing, very influential. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources called dibs on the next one. So there's a conference coming up in, I think, April is almost certainly when it's going to be, but it could get pushed related to COVID. That is hosted by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, which is great. So that's the next one. And the Georgia Climate Project is helping them design components. And there will be a Drawdown Georgia session within it. I likely won't be the one presenting because I don't always want to be the one presenting. Again, it's important that people see that it's not just the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, not just John out in front of this. I am not the leader. I hope to be a good leader, but one of many. So I look forward to, as they design out that session, how Drawdown Georgia is shared.
And Theodosia also asked if there are other cities or counties comparable to Covington and Newton that are moving forward with drawdown agendas like this that we could learn from.
Y'all are the first to really be connecting directly with what we've created, and that's tremendous. A credit to you all. We hope that there's many more, and that those plans that you form and as you hope to learn from others, others can learn from you. That needs to happen. That's a part of the movement building. It won't just happen at the level of individuals. It will absolutely happen at the level of organizations and broader communities. How can communities learn from each other in this work? So I encourage you, to the extent that you know folks in other parts of the state who have an interest in all of this, tell them what you're doing. Encourage them to engage. There's a word that Martin O'Malley, who ran for president, was the governor of Maryland. I think he coined it. Might be somebody else, but I know I've heard it from him. Co-opetition. We want cooperation and competition simultaneously. That's the best way that we can do it. So maybe there could be some friendly competition that goes on between Sustainable Newton and other similarly situated organizations. That's actually one of our hopes for Drawdown Georgia, is that we inspire other states to create their own drawdown movement themselves. And if we can do that, maybe Georgia can start competing with South Carolina or Florida or heck, even California to be the first state to achieve carbon neutrality. That sort of co-opetition is what we need.
All right. Well, I'm going to slip in one last question of my own, and then we'll wrap it up. And because I mentioned your ecocentricity blog, and I just wanted to test and see if I could get that word out this time. But
nice.
You had one this week. So our motto at Sustainable Newton says, "There's no time like the present to give our children a better future." And you had a blog post this week about challenging your readers to be a better ancestor. So maybe let's end with that in terms of what we can all take away in that spirit.
Yeah, to me, the impetus for that, there's a new book out called the Good Ancestor, and that's, I linked in my blog to a write up of that. I have not read the book, but I look forward to it. I actually heard from the author after I wrote my blog post, and he was appreciative of it. So feel free to check that out. We can read it all together. The Good Ancestor, this mindset, and it's all about long-term thinking, where we often challenge corporations to do so. Like, corporations absolutely need long-term thinking to get out, especially publicly traded ones, get out of their short-term thinking around the next quarterly earnings report and what Wall Street will think about it. Because if that's the frame through which businesses are operating, then they won't be able to deliver the long-term value to their businesses, to their communities, and to the planet. True triple bottom line thinking. That long-term value is only captured by long-term thinking. But we can't ask our corporations to do long-term thinking if we're not willing to do it ourselves. And it's this mindset of being a better ancestor, recognizing the impacts that we're going to have in the generations to come. It's what resonated most deeply with my grandfather. When he was beating the drum for sustainability in his company, it took a little while before the people of Interface adopted it. I mean, they thought he was crazy, to be perfectly honest. Mid-90s, and the CEO of a publicly traded company says, we have to be completely sustainable. People weren't ready for that message. But there was a poem that one of his employees wrote after he spoke to them on a Tuesday morning in 1996, called Tomorrow's Child. And it's a poem that speaks to, I encourage you to look it up, it speaks to this mindfulness of our descendants whom we may never know, and what we owe to them. Tomorrow's Child was such an encouragement to my grandfather, because he knew that person who wrote it, Glenn Thomas, one of his employees, really got it. And it was the beginning of this real movement towards the people of Interface accepting it. So I, in so many respects, as Ray's grandson, I was his tomorrow's child. You know, I've got a 4-year-old son. I've got a 2-year-old daughter. I've done the math. At the end of the century, when climate will really know how have we done, when the clock hits 2100, my son's going to be 84 and my daughter will be 82. They may live every single day of this century, and they're going to live it whether the world that they inherit is better than it is now or worse. So for me, they're my motivation, just like Tomorrow's Child was my grandfather's. And if I had to guess, our children, our grandchildren, and all young people to inherit this planet are a motivation for many of you all as well.
Well, John, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning, and for all you're doing and all that I know many people are doing. And as you said, it's not just you, but we want you to know you've got friends out here who are working as hard as we can to help, carry this forward. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. I know a lot of you are already members of or involved with Sustainable Newton, but if you're not, we really, it's an ambitious agenda to take all these solutions and do what we can to move them forward in the kind of time frame we're talking about. So the more of you that can engage with us, the better. And if you go look at our calendar right now, you won't find any next events on there other than our board meetings, and that's not normal for us. But as we start this new year, we're really trying to define a program that supports this initiative. So stay real close to us, and I think you're going to see a lot of exciting opportunities to participate. So with that, I'll wrap us up for now. I think there's a few questions that came in towards the end, and if there's follow-up to do, I will take those actions. So everybody, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend, and we'll all be in touch. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.